Does status and prestige build a better car? That's the question worth asking when revisiting Lincoln's lineup during the turbulent 1970s. An era when luxury meant something very different than it does today. While Cadillac basked in its long-held reputation and Chrysler's Imperial tried to hold on to relevance, Lincoln found itself balancing refinement with reality and image with engineering. At first glance, the 1970 Lincoln Continental and Mark III seemed like proud symbols of American success. Long, stately, and dripping with chrome. But beneath their imposing sheet metal, both cars shared much with their Ford cousins. The Continental rode on the same chassis as full-size Ford Motor Company sedans, while the Mark III shared its underpinnings with the four-door Thunderbird. For purists, this platform sharing raised eyebrows. Was Lincoln truly a luxury brand if it borrowed its bones from the everyday Ford lineup? Or was it proof that prestige could be engineered more through craftsmanship and detail than through exclusivity? As the decade progressed, Lincoln continued down this path. The Continental Mark IV arrived with cleaner styling and a more cohesive identity, finally giving the brand a signature shape: that long hood, short deck, and trademark spare tire hump. Consumer Guide praised its workmanship and reliability, calling it above average for its class. Its successor, the Mark V, grew even larger and more elaborate, the very definition of late 1970s excess. Despite shrinking trunk space and tighter rear quarters, its overall quality and repair record impressed reviewers. Then came the Mark VI, smaller, lighter, and far less distinctive. Downsizing was unavoidable in a world shifting toward fuel efficiency and practicality. But to some, the loss of mass meant a loss of character. Lincoln had traded its rolling monument style for modern restraint, and not all buyers followed. And then, of course, there was the Versailles, Lincoln's attempt to compete with the Cadillac Seville. Based on the Mercury Monarch, it carried the right badge but lacked the presence and polish of its rivals. Consumer Guide summed it up bluntly: if you are looking for a car of this type, consider a first-generation Seville instead. It was a telling comment. Prestige alone couldn't disguise the limitations of badge engineering. Looking back, the 1970s were a decade of identity crisis for Lincoln. Yet through it all, the brand maintained a reputation for solid construction and long-lasting dependability. Consumer Guide noted that virtually any Lincoln of the era could deliver 100,000 miles with minimal major repairs. For many owners, that reliability, combined with unmistakable style, was proof enough that status didn't just sell cars. Sometimes it built them too. Does status and prestige build a better car? That's the question worth asking when revisiting Lincoln's lineup during the turbulent 1970s. An era when luxury, technology, and taste collided with regulation, recession, and radical change in what Americans expected from an automobile. For Lincoln, the decade represented both triumph and transformation. A period when elegance was tested by efficiency, and when the meaning of American luxury itself began to shift. At the dawn of the 1970s, Lincoln was still riding high. The Continental remained a symbol of executive refinement, a car that spoke softly but carried a long wheelbase. The Continental Mark III, introduced for 1969, had quickly earned its place as the brand's halo model, boasting the perfect mix of power, poise, and presence. But under its stately exterior, the Mark III shared more than a little DNA with the Ford Thunderbird. It was an early sign of Lincoln's pragmatic engineering approach, one that balanced luxury aspirations with corporate cost efficiency. Still, the Mark III carried itself with authority. With its razor-edge styling, deep chrome bumpers, and signature Continental hump on the trunk lid, it exuded confidence. Drivers didn't care that it shared parts with a Ford. What mattered was the way it made them feel: important, comfortable, and unmistakably American. When the Mark IV debuted in 1972, Lincoln had truly found its design identity. Longer, lower, and more ornate, it became the face of American luxury for the decade. Consumer Guide noted its above-average build quality and strong reliability record, and despite its considerable weight, the Mark IV's 460 cubic inch V8 delivered effortless performance. Inside, plush upholstery, thick carpets, and wood-grain trim cocooned occupants in near-silent comfort. These were cars designed not to be driven hard, but to glide, to make a statement at 35 miles per hour down a palm-lined boulevard. By the time the Mark V arrived in 1977, Lincoln had perfected the formula. It was massive, nearly 230 inches long, and unapologetically indulgent. Opera windows, hideaway headlamps, and endless options for colors and interior materials made it a rolling expression of personal taste. Consumer Guide continued to rate it solidly, even remarking that reliability improved for the final 1979 models. But beneath that luxury lay the shadow of change. Rising fuel prices, tighter emission standards, and shifting public attitudes toward extravagance made such excess harder to justify. The American dream was getting smaller, lighter, and more economical. The downsized Mark VI that followed in 1980 was both a technical success and a cultural compromise. Built on Ford's new Panther platform, it was vastly more efficient, safer, and easier to live with. Yet for some, it had lost the magic, that commanding road presence, the feeling of grandeur that made earlier Marks so memorable. Consumer Guide's faint praise, noting it was far less distinctive but better for it, captured the mood perfectly. Progress, it seemed, came at a price. Not every Lincoln of the era earned admiration. The Versailles, introduced in 1977, remains one of the brand's most controversial moves. Based heavily on the Mercury Monarch, it was meant to compete directly with Cadillac's popular Seville. On paper, the idea made sense. A smaller Lincoln with luxury appointments and a prestigious badge. In execution, it fell flat. Consumers saw through the rebadging, recognizing the Versailles as a dressed-up Ford. Critics were harsh, and even Consumer Guide advised readers to consider a first-generation Seville instead. The Versailles might have looked refined, but it lacked the soul and substance that buyers expected from the Lincoln nameplate. Despite these missteps, Lincoln maintained a reputation for longevity and reliability. Consumer Guide's observation that virtually any Lincoln will deliver 100,000 miles of useful life with minimal major repairs wasn't an exaggeration. These were well-built cars, over-engineered in many ways, with drivetrains that could outlast their fashion cycles. While Cadillac leaned heavily on prestige and brand loyalty, Lincoln quietly cultivated a base of owners who appreciated craftsmanship and endurance. Driving a 1970s Lincoln today is a trip back to a different mindset. The steering is slow, the suspension soft, and the visibility framed by acres of hood and trunk. Yet it feels dignified, deliberate. These cars were never meant for corner carving or racing through city traffic. They were meant to float, to isolate, to reassure the driver that the world outside couldn't intrude. Sitting behind the wheel, surrounded by chrome and leather, one can almost hear Sinatra or Barry White on the 8-track, the soundtrack of a confident America that hadn't yet learned the word downsizing. In retrospect, the 1970s were both the pinnacle and the turning point for Lincoln. The decade's cars embodied the last great gasp of American excess before pragmatism took over. While critics accused Lincoln of resting on its image, others saw it as preserving an art form, the art of comfort, craftsmanship, and commanding style. These cars didn't just move people, they made statements. Today, collectors view the Mark IV and Mark V as design icons, while even the misunderstood Versailles has gained a cult following for its rarity. Their presence at classic car shows serves as a reminder of what luxury once meant. Not speed or technology, but stature and serenity. In the end, the question remains, does prestige build a better car? Perhaps not always. But in the case of 1970s Lincoln, prestige built something arguably more enduring, a feeling. A sense of timeless grace that, even decades later, still turns heads and reminds us of a time when size, comfort, and confidence ruled the American road. Today, when enthusiasts look back on the 1970s Lincoln lineup, there's a certain irony in how time has treated these cars. What critics once dismissed as bloated and ostentatious is now celebrated for exactly those qualities. The long hoods, the massive chrome grilles, the velour interiors, all of it captures the unapologetic confidence of an era when American luxury meant comfort above all else. These cars weren't designed for efficiency or subtlety. They were designed to make an entrance, to glide through life with quiet authority. Restored examples of the Mark IV and Mark V now command respect on the concours lawn and cruise nights alike. collectors have grown to appreciate the craftsmanship that went into every detail, from the precisely fitted vinyl tops to the intricate opera windows and Cartier clocks embedded in the dashboard. For many, owning a 1970s Lincoln isn't just about nostalgia. It's about preserving a vision of American automotive optimism that no longer exists. Lincoln's story in that decade also serves as a broader reflection on the changing ideals of luxury. It reminds us that prestige, while fleeting, can leave a lasting mark when it's backed by quality and vision. Even as the world moved toward smaller, more efficient cars, Lincoln continued to represent the pinnacle of American comfort and craftsmanship. Half a century later, the legacy endures. When one of these massive machines rolls by, it's impossible not to look. The presence, the poise, the aura, they speak of a time when the road itself was an expression of status, and when Lincoln, above all, stood for the idea that luxury should never apologize for being grand.